The morning of our 10th wedding anniversary, my husband kissed my forehead, smiled, and whispered, "Happy anniversary, beautiful." 5 minutes later, I was on the bathroom floor, staring into a mirror that reflected someone I didn't recognize. My hair was gone, almost all of it. At first, I thought I was seriously ill. Then, I found the note. "No one will ever want you now." That's when I realized this wasn't an accident. It was a plan. What my husband didn't know was that before midnight, I was supposed to inherit $15 million. He thought he had destroyed my confidence. He had no idea he had just destroyed his own future. The morning of our 10th wedding anniversary, I woke up screaming. At first, I couldn't understand why my face felt so cold against the pillow. Then I looked down. The white pillowcase wasn't stained with blood or anything dramatic. It was covered in hair. Not a few loose strands. Not the handful you sometimes lose after brushing. Almost all of it. My breath caught in my throat as my trembling fingers touched my scalp. Hair came away in my hands. I stumbled toward the bathroom, praying I was still dreaming. But dreams don't usually stare back at you. The woman in the mirror barely looked like me. Large patches of my scalp were completely bare, while the few remaining strands hung unevenly around my face. My knees gave out. I slid onto the cold tile floor and burst into tears. Today was supposed to be our anniversary. 10 years of marriage. Instead, I couldn't even recognize the woman staring back at me. As I struggled to steady my breathing, something caught my eye. An ivory envelope rested neatly on the bathroom counter. My name was written across the front in my husband's handwriting. With shaking fingers, I opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet. Only one sentence. "Now you finally look as ugly as the person you've always been." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I knew that handwriting better than my own. The man who had promised to love me for the rest of my life had left me that message on the morning we were supposed to celebrate our marriage. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. His side of the closet was half empty. His suitcase was gone. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Was this some horrible joke? An accident? Or had the man I trusted more than anyone deliberately planned this? A few hours later, after my doctor ruled out an immediate medical emergency and explained that I would need further testing to determine the exact cause of the sudden hair loss, I sat alone in my car staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My anniversary dinner reservation was still scheduled for 7 o'clock. The lawyer handling my late grandmother's estate had also scheduled one final appointment that evening. After years of legal delays, I was finally set to receive the inheritance she had left me. $15 million. My husband knew every detail. He believed that by the end of our anniversary, that fortune would soon become part of our future together. What he didn't know, I was no longer sure he deserved even a single dollar. Looking back, the signs hadn't appeared overnight. They had been quietly building for months. The problem was, love has a strange way of making obvious things look perfectly normal. Ryan and I had been married for 10 years. To everyone around us, we were the couple people envied. We rarely argued. We traveled when we could. We laughed over takeout dinners on Friday nights. He never forgot my birthday, always brought me coffee exactly the way I liked it, and held my hand every time we crossed a busy street. If someone had asked me a week before our anniversary whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered without hesitation. Completely. When my grandmother passed away 2 years earlier, leaving me nearly $15 million through a family trust, Ryan had been incredibly supportive. Or, at least that's what I believed. He sat beside me through every meeting with the attorneys. He reminded me not to let the money change who I was. He even joked that we'd still argue over whose turn it was to wash the dishes. Back then, I thought those were the words of a good man. Now I hear something very different. About 6 months before our anniversary, he started asking more questions. When does the trust finally close? Have the lawyers picked an exact date yet? Will the money arrive all at once? At first, those questions seemed reasonable. It was a life-changing amount of money. Anyone would be curious. Then his curiosity became an obsession. Every time my attorney emailed me, Ryan wanted to know what it said. Whenever I finished a phone call with the estate office, he'd casually ask, "Any updates?" He always smiled while asking. Always sounded supportive. I never questioned it. He also began talking about expensive things we'd never discussed before. A waterfront house, a yacht, a sports car he'd admired for years, private clubs, luxury vacations that cost more than our yearly mortgage. Whenever I reminded him that I wanted to invest most of the inheritance, he'd laugh. "You've spent your whole life being responsible," he'd say. "Maybe it's finally time to enjoy it." Then there were the late nights. More business dinners. More unexplained meetings. He started keeping his phone face down whenever we were together. If I entered the room unexpectedly, the screen would already be dark. Once, I walked into the kitchen just as he ended a call. The smile disappeared from his face so quickly it startled me. "Who was that?" I asked. "Wrong number," he replied almost instantly. I believed him, because trusting him had become a habit. But after reading that cruel note, every memory looked different. That afternoon, I walked into his home office for the first time in months. His desk was unusually tidy, almost too tidy. Inside the bottom drawer, tucked beneath old tax files, sat a plain black folder. When I opened it, my entire world shifted again. Across the first page, in bold letters, were the words, "Post-inheritance divorce timeline." And suddenly, I realized waking up bald wasn't the beginning of his plan. It was simply the final step before he expected to walk away with everything. I didn't confront Ryan. Not yet. The man who left that note expected me to react with anger, heartbreak, maybe even desperation. Instead, I decided to become the one thing he never expected. Quiet. For the next 2 days, I answered his texts as if nothing had changed. "Hope you're feeling better. We'll get through this together. I love you." Every message felt like another performance. And every lie made it easier for me to stop loving him. While he believed I was recovering, I started collecting answers. The first came from our phone records. There was one number Ryan had called almost every day for months. Sometimes late at night. Sometimes before sunrise. The calls were too frequent to ignore. When I searched the number online, a social media profile appeared. Her name was Vanessa. She wasn't just someone from work. Photos showed Ryan standing beside her at charity events he claimed he'd attended alone. Another picture showed the two of them at a beach resort during a weekend. He told me he was away at a leadership conference. The dates matched perfectly. I felt sick, but I kept digging. A few days later, I followed him. It wasn't difficult. He drove straight from his office to an upscale apartment building across town. I watched from inside my car as Vanessa came downstairs. She smiled the moment she saw him. Then she kissed him. Not like two people having an affair. Like two people planning a future together. They laughed. He opened her car door. She rested her hand on his shoulder as if she'd done it 1,000 times. I should have driven away. Instead, I waited. When they finally left, I walked inside the building. The concierge mistook me for a delivery guest and pointed me toward the mailbox area. That's where I saw it. Apartment 1108. 2 names. Vanessa Brooks. Ryan Carter. My husband wasn't just cheating. He was already living another life. That evening, I called my attorney before Ryan could. I asked one simple question. Can the inheritance transfer be delayed? There was a brief silence. Then she answered. Yes, if you're having concerns about protecting your separate assets. Please delay everything, I said. No one needs to know. Especially not Ryan. That night, he walked into our house carrying flowers, smiling as though he were still the perfect husband. He kissed my forehead, asked how I was feeling, told me our anniversary dinner would be unforgettable. For the first time since I found that note, I smiled back. Because he was right. It would be unforgettable, just not for the reason he believed. Saturday evening arrived, and Ryan looked happier than I had seen him in months. He handed me a small velvet jewelry box before we left the house. Inside was a pair of diamond earrings. They're beautiful, I said. He smiled. I wanted tonight to be perfect. I almost laughed. Not because of the gift. Because I finally understood it wasn't an anniversary present. It was an investment. He believed that in just a few hours, $15 million would erase every dollar he had spent pretending to love me. The restaurant's private dining room was filled with family and close friends. Soft music played in the background. Champagne glasses sparkled beneath the lights. Everyone complimented my silk headscarf, assuming I had simply chosen a different style for the evening. Only Ryan knew what was hidden beneath it. Dinner was almost over when he stood and tapped his glass. "I just want to say how grateful I am," he began. "My wife has been my greatest blessing for the last 10 years. The room filled with smiles. He reached for my hand. "I can't wait to see what our future brings." The applause began. Then he looked directly at me. "Sweetheart, why don't you tell everyone your exciting news?" There it was, the moment he had been waiting for. I stood slowly, accepted the wireless microphone. For a second, I simply looked around the room. Then I untied the scarf. A gasp echoed through the dining room as my nearly bald scalp was revealed. Ryan's smile disappeared instantly. "This," I said calmly, "is how I woke up on the morning of our anniversary." Without another word, I removed the folded note from my purse. "I also woke up to this." I handed it to Ryan's mother. She read it silently. Then her face turned white. She passed it to his father. Soon the note was moving from one stunned guest to another. No one spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. I also discovered that my husband has been planning to divorce me immediately after my inheritance was transferred. Ryan shot to his feet. "That's a lie." "Is it?" I asked quietly. I placed copies of the divorce timeline, apartment lease, and photographs on the table. One by one, our guests looked through them. The room became painfully silent. Ryan kept talking. He blamed misunderstandings. He claimed the papers were old. He insisted the apartment belonged to someone else. No one interrupted him. No one defended him. Then the doors opened. My attorney walked inside carrying a single envelope. Ryan smiled again. He thought she was there to complete the inheritance transfer. He couldn't have been more wrong. My attorney stopped beside our table and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Carter," she said, placing the envelope in my hands, "per your instructions, the inheritance transfer has been suspended until further notice." Ryan frowned. "What?" She turned toward him politely. "Because these assets belong solely to Mrs. Carter under the terms of the family trust, no transfer or financial planning involving them can move forward without her written authorization." The color drained from his face. He looked at me as if he were seeing a complete stranger. "You delayed it?" "I protected it," I answered. Silence filled the room. For the first time all evening, Ryan had nothing to say. The confident smile was gone. The future he had carefully planned disappeared in a single sentence. Within a week, I filed for divorce. My attorney used every document I had uncovered to establish the timeline of deception and financial planning. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, just clear evidence and difficult conversations that led to a fair legal resolution. Ryan moved into the apartment he had shared with Vanessa. It didn't last. A few months later, I heard they had separated. Without the fortune he expected, their perfect future suddenly didn't seem so perfect anymore. As for me, the hair loss turned out to be temporary. Recovery took time. So did rebuilding my confidence. Some mornings I still reached for my hairbrush before remembering everything that had happened. But each new strand that grew back reminded me of something far more important. Strength isn't measured by what you lose. It's measured by what you refuse to let define you. I kept the inheritance exactly where my grandmother intended it to be. I invested most of it wisely and donated part of it to organizations that support people facing hair loss conditions and confidence challenges, hoping someone else might find encouragement during a difficult season. People sometimes ask whether I regret exposing Ryan in front of everyone. I always give the same answer. No, because he believed taking my hair would take my confidence. Instead, it gave me the courage to take back my future. And in the end, the $15 million was never my greatest victory. Walking away with my dignity was.